Hello everyone, I'm Professor Ozan Örmeci from Istanbul Kent University. Sorry, we have a very distinguished guest from United States today from the Catholic University of America, Professor Herbert Reginbogen. Professor Reginbogen has been teaching and publishing extensively about Nuremberg trials, Second World War, international law, U.S. foreign policy, and recently, of course, Turkish-American relations. We edited a book together, which will be soon published by Lexington Books. And hello, Professor, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Uh, since we haven't spoken, there have been some important developments in the US and in the world, Professor. So let me begin with a question on the results of the elections. I mean, the potential impacts of the elections. President-elect Donald Trump will soon take over and he will serve as the 47th president of the United States. And he already nominated Florida Senator Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. So, what are your thoughts on potential effects of Trump and Rubio on U.S. foreign policy and particularly Turkish-American relations?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. In regard to the question, Senator Rubio will soon become the Secretary of State of the United States. And like President-elect Trump, his focus will be on disruption. That's the key word, disruption. His focus, Marco Rubio, will be on the disruption of the State Department, which is rooted in an increasingly irrelevant past. So to understand that is to understand how quick, how efficient, how well informed is the United States about world affairs immediately. It has an idea that it has a lot of embassies and consuls, but why do you need that? I mean, news comes quickly. We live in a 21st century technology. And if we really wanted to have intelligence on the ground, we'd have to have them in other places. How many know that Bafia now has a revolution in Africa since November 29th? Have you read about it? No. It's not in the newspaper. But there it is. Where's the corruption? Where's the kleptocracy? Where is the democracy in Africa? Are we informed? Do we know? Do we even care? I guess we do care when it comes to our security. And that's what we're talking about, is our security. So America is really fed up with its own bureaucracy. It's fed up with having lost two major wars that may have never been needed in their perception. And now you have a country that is now saying enough is enough. So, here comes a reassertion of American power in the Middle East, and it will be a blueprint for the Trump administration. What happens here in the Middle East will be a blueprint for everything that is going to happen in the next 4 years. It's going to be a comprehensive plan to restore American leadership. No more compromises in the sense of America and what it stands for. Whatever you think it stands for, or whatever you criticize for what it never stood for, the fact is what the Americans, quote unquote, and Donald Trump in this case, believes is important. So, for example, how to counter Iranian aggression. Iranian aggression. Iran is not a friend. Who ever thought that? Is North Korea a friend? Not to the West, not from the perception of the United States. And so it's about securing stability. And stability means in the Middle East, you've got to start changing the way you do business with terrorists. And the question is, well, one's freedom fighter is a terrorist and one terrorist is a freedom fighter. Well, I guess we have to choose. And how do you do that? That's going to be the great challenges facing Senator Rubio and President-elect Donald Trump.
Okay, Professor. Maybe in the coming days we can specify as President Trump will be in the White House, in the Oval Office. Maybe we can talk more detail about what could happen in terms of Turkish-American relations. But let me ask you another question, Professor. Since you are a rare expert on international law, I mean, there was much media coverage about the ICC's recent decision for the arrest of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. How we should evaluate this decision? I mean, could it be practically applied? Because it happened to Russian President Vladimir Putin previously, and no arrest has been done. So, could it be practically mean something for the diplomacy and Israel's foreign policy, also Israel's relations with Turkey, United States, etc.?
Before I answer that question, which I will do immediately, let me just come back to what you said. It is possible right now to suspect what will be Turkish-American relations with Donald Trump as the President of the United States, although he's not taken the oath of office. But we can speculate seriously what this is going to be about. But I'll come back to that in a moment to answer this question. So ISIS has the jurisdiction because Ukraine asked the ICC, that's International Criminal Court, where there are 123 or 140 countries which are members. It's not a small organization. So 196 countries and more than 2/3 are members. And if that makes any significance, it's about state practice. So the states have committed by treaty to uphold the rule of law. And that means nobody or anything is above the law. They're all the same for those who've committed to become members of the International Criminal Court. And where did this all begin? Well, this began back after World War II. And there was, again, Nazis, atrocities, war crimes, crime of aggression, and these became known as the Nuremberg Principles. And these are the codex of cooperation, codex of the principles, which, when violated, become criminal. But not criminal only for the states, whatever that might be, but for the leaders who make the decisions. So now we have, for the first time, leaders who have no immunity for what they do. They are responsible, not only to what happens outside of the country, but also within the country. Because now we have legislation that's been called for R2P. So that means we are going to protect people within the domestic territory of a state. So it's no longer, oh, this is my country and I can do whatever I want. No, that's over, because we have understood through the genocides of Rwanda, East Timor, even think about Srebrenica during the Bosnian War. Think about it. These are all religions that are being, again, causing hundreds of thousands of victims. Now, when you think about the war in Ukraine, well, I don't think it's really hard who invaded Ukraine. It was Russia on February 24th, 2022, which is now going to be 3 years old almost. So here's a crime of all crimes, which ironically is the crime that the Soviet Union introduced against the German Nazis in 1945 and 46. So they themselves introduced this crime called the crime of aggression. And now the same crime of aggression has been has caused an issue of warrant of arrest for Vladimir Putin and co. Not really, well, also for what we would call children deportation. So when you take children you're also destroying a culture. And again, this is a war crime. So there is issues of genocide, issues of crime of aggression, crime against humanity, but specifically, this is now about the crime of aggression. Now, moving on to comparison. Well, the prosecutor of the ICC said he believes that there are grounds for such a warrant. And he went to the pre-chamber, which is the judges, and he laid out the evidence. And it took many weeks to make sure, in good judgment, to issue this warrant. And then it was issued. But it wasn't issued only against Netanyahu or Gantz, but also for the leader of the leader of the Hamas.
Yes.
So where are we talking about? In other words, what you have here is a very isolated, very narrow focus on what the ICC is doing. It's doing what are called alleged crimes. They're not crimes that have been proven. They're being they're going to be asked to bring these people to The Hague, where the ICC is located, and to stand trial. Now,
And they have
why?
right to appeal, right, Professor? They have right to appeal also.
Of course, it's a trial. But again, they don't have to go to The Hague. If a judiciary form of government, or rather, when you have a government, a stable government, and it has a judiciary, an independent judiciary that respects the rule of law, like in the United States, like in Israel, yes, Israel, then they can request, let me have the evidence that you have in The Hague, confidentially be transferred. The prosecutor of Israel will look at it and will make a decision. His responsibility is to follow the rule of law and the Constitution of Israel, just like in the United States. Not some person's opinion, not somebody who says, I'm the strong man. These are the rules of the law, and nobody's above them. So if Israel, after the war, says, I'd like to look at them objectively, if they find there is credibility, even through their own investigation, and they're making many investigations right now, Israel, about allegations of war crimes, not only about these two people, Israelis, many others. And while this goes on, this kind of investigation, forensic investigation, just like in Ukraine, who is investigating Russian atrocities, it continues. And when the war has ended, this will become a very important part of the issuing of the warrant of arrest in terms of executing it. Now, what Israel can do, and probably will, if they do find evidence which is credible, and there is certainly credible evidence, then they will request that these people stand trial in Israel. And there will be no immunity. There is no immunity. And they will have to face the consequences. And this is the way the ICC works. It's called complementarity. You know, the point is, if a failed state like Rwanda, a failed state somewhere else in East Timor, in Asia, is in total chaos, where people are killing each other because of their ethnic backgrounds or religion, you don't have a stable state. You have a failed state. But Israel is not failed. America's not failed. So again, all of these suggestions, that's fine. The warrant of arrest is great. Let's get them. There are things. What do you mean get them? They're supposed to stand trial. They're alleged crimes. You may believe yourself that they are criminals, but in the court of law, until they are proven guilty, they're not guilty. And that remains an alleged crime. So words matter. And if people love to be respected, they should also choose the right words. Then they will be really respected. And here's where we have our problem, coming back to your third question, but I hope I may have answered this question
Yeah,
first.
yeah. Yes, Professor.
So should I turn to the other question?
Yeah, please go ahead, Professor.
So, you know, the most important issue for the Trump administration, and unfortunately, there are people who are really very parochial in their understanding of what happens in the Middle East, especially for the people of Palestine. But that's what we have here, and we better understand that. So the first priority, above all others, will be the defense of Israel's security and its existence. No questions. That's the first priority. And there's no way to come around. If you do understand that, now you understand the next step of the blueprint for the future of the next 4 years. And the question is, how do you secure peace in the Middle East, not just for now, for a long time? And for that, Trump will have an ear. In fact, Rubio will have an ear. Now the question is, what can Turkey do? Because Turkey is a very pivotal player in this region. Well, Turkey has what often been on the wrong side of history, as quote unquote. Now they may be justified in their interpretation of history, and that's fine. If they can understand, if you can make the world understand that they've made a big failure in what is interpreted in history, go for it. There's no reason why we should live in some kind of biased world, prejudice. If there's truth to be found, let's find the truth. That's the whole idea. And however, politics twists narratives for their own political expediency. And so we have now a question of how do we change the narrative, not just because of political expediency, but in terms of improving the relationship based on the principles of a rule of law. Because you can't go back and change what happened in history. That's done. So forget the nostalgia. Look into the now and the future for what we have to do for children today, ourselves, and the children's children. And that means climate change. That means cooperation. That means stability. And now you have Syria. And here we have a big problem because Syria is the territorial real estate between Iran and the Mediterranean. And this is what we have as a problem in the Middle East. The
Yes,
Hezbollah.
let me ask you, Professor. I mean, could you explain to us from the American administration's perspective what has been going on in Syria recently? We know that there was a renewed attacks in Aleppo, and rebel forces seized the control of the city. As there were rumors about President Assad leaving for Russia, or there was a coup attempt against him. So, what has been going on exactly in Syria from American perspective, and what will be the peace plan, if possible, of President-elect Trump for Syria?
Well, the reason that jihadists, in this case, it's Tahir al-Sham, better known as the HTS. The reason he has been so successful on the battlefield is because Iran has been weakened. It's weak. It's a Hezbollah. It's weak. It's taken a total beating by having this war with Israel. And now that the HTS, its leader, uh, 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 has taken advantage of the conditions and is now successful. But now we have another issue. Who's supporting this terrorist organization? Well, you don't call it a terrorist? Well, some do. You know, although he was working with Al Qaeda, and he now says, no, I'm not working with Al Qaeda. Well, what do we think about the Iranian president when he left from France to come back to Tehran? We all expected a democracy. Watch out. You know, the point is, do you really trust him to really establish a democracy? Should he win a war against Assad? Question mark. So the United States is looking very carefully at this issue because its blueprint is, again, American troops back home. Goodbye, Syria. But to do that, the Americans, because they have to protect Israel, remember, Israel is the primary actor here. So whatever America does, whatever Donald Trump decides, he's going to first say Israel must be secure. And if that means more troops, well, you got it. And if you want to go to war with Iran, guess what? But we're going to make sure Israel has no problem. So you have now time until January 20th to get your act together. After that, here I come, Donald Trump. So again, this problem in Syria is about balance of power, and it's shifted. And now there's a vacuum. And that vacuum is now, are we going to win against, that means we, the West, etc., against a murderer, a leader who's been really accused of these atrocities of killing his own people? Will he be captured, or will he, fly to Russia to escape justice? And now we have a new president, a new leader. Who's that going to be? Or is there going to be a master plan and peace negotiation, a security model for not only Syria, but for the entire Middle East? Again, a blueprint, just like the blueprint for Ukraine and Russia. What could that be? So if you want to ask me, yeah, I would say we need to get rid of all the proxies. No more proxies. No more foreign armies in the region. You can
That
have them
requires a
state.
political solution, I guess, Professor.
That is a political solution. It's something that may be considered, because you're saying, well, this is a friend of mine. I mean, if you say the Hamas is a friend, which is officially Turkey's position, you're going to not go anywhere with Turkish-American relations. You've stopped right there, and you can say,
US
well,
also says PYD YPG is my friend, Professor. It's
I
kind of
know, but right, but you have to understand. The question is, what is Donald Trump's impact on Turkish-American relations? And again, who is the enemy of Israel? That's the question. And that's the Hamas. So if you support the Hamas, my friend is your friend, my enemy is your enemy. So you figure it out. You got options. But come 20th of January 2025, you better figure that out quickly. And it means right now. So there are, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, Professor, you basically said I'm trying to explain for our audience. The primary intention of the US president will be to secure Israel, as all US presidents maybe, and he will decide accordingly, he will act accordingly. So in that case, should we expect further deepening of the Abraham Accords, Arab-Israeli normalization, and could Turkish-Israeli normalization be a political reality in case President Trump, similar to his first term, comes up with a peace plan in Palestine? Could it be on his agenda, like the deal of the century or some other sort of peace plan to save Palestinians?
I think Israel cannot, in the long term, sustain a one-state solution. There's just too many Muslim, Arabs, etc., to include in a state which calls itself a Jewish state. Although it has 2 million Israeli Arabs,
Yes.
it still has that identity issue. And it does not have the capacity to integrate, like in Europe, millions of Arabs. Now, we in Europe, in Germany, in 2016, took 1 million Syrians and brought them to Germany. Now, there was problems, and a lot of problems still occur, but many of them, many hundreds of thousands of them, have been integrated. They speak the German language, they have got schools, their education, a job, etc., etc. Israel cannot do that. It does not have that capacity. Therefore, it's going to be an issue of how do we, and that means all of us, the neighbors of Middle East, of the Arabic Peninsula, how do we in the West, everybody, for humanitarian reasons, find a solution, which we avoided for 80 years. We never took care of this. And now we are confronted. And this dilemma can explode into more than just a regional war. It can become it could become a major crisis. And to avoid all these subsets, the political solution would be to get rid of the proxies. And you do that through neutrality. So if you made Syria a permanently neutral country by acceptance of its people, or it's a negotiated peace, understanding Assad should not be around. He's got an exit. Now, that might be not for many people what they'd like to hear, but that's the political reality. And again, this is not justice, but is political expediency. And sometimes you need that. So if you can reach that kind of an agreement with the states, the neighbors, including Iran, they understand if they don't want Donald Trump to be really very, very aggressive towards them, they have a way to show diplomatically how to come back into the world order. Because again, Iran is excluded, it's sanctioned. If it really wants a pathway back into the world community and have no sanctions, this is a pathway to consider. And if Turkey doesn't want to be, blacklisted by the Trump administration for supporting Hamas, then let's do something for the people of Hamas. Not the Hamas, but the people of Palestine and the people of Gaza. Let's forget the government or the groups. Let's go to the people. And that's, again, a whole new language or lingua. And if you want to do that, Turkey will not support the jihadists. Again, because you don't know what they are going to bring in terms of the vacuum that has been created, should they be successful on the battlefield. And then the YPG, well, you can get that also under control. If you're going to make a master plan of neutralization or permanent neutrality, you can make certain territories that the people of Syria, agree to say this area between Turkey and the areas that are occupied by the YPG become demilitarized. And then you have a peacekeeping troop. And that's always in the territorial integrity of a country. That's the most important principle. The territorial integrity. You cannot just go and bomb some country and say, well, I did it for self-defense. Well, that's not going to work. Maybe once, twice, but for many years, no. You're going to have to find solutions. And if you don't, you have these kind of radicalizations, you have this kind of instability, and that's not what your objective is. But because, again, the objective is stability, an end of war in the Middle East. Let's not say the Middle East, let's say the Arabic Peninsula and the neighboring countries, which would be Iran and Turkey.
So you think the red line of the new administration will be Israel's security, and especially from Turkish prism, it will be relations with Hamas, right, Professor?
That probably surmises what I'm saying. And I think, look, if Turkey believes, and I understand that the people of Gaza have suffered unbelievable.
Yes.
And and you can say, well, it's because of them and them. I'd like to remind everybody, the richest neighbors are the Arabic countries. And the richest neighbors over many, many decades could have done more, much more, than allowing millions of people to live in tents. If you really are a wealthy country and you really have such moral principles, ask the question, why? Why have so many people, Palestinians, the people of Gaza, had to go through so much hardship when they had so many neighbors with so much resources?
I understand and I agree with you, Professor. With the support of Gulf countries, primarily the Saudi Arabian kingdom. I mean, maybe if we could have a settlement in Palestine, in Gaza, the creation of a Palestinian state, that could also normalize Saudi-Israeli relations, hopefully, which will, of course, increase the regional stability because both countries are American allies. Saudi Arabia also, despite its efforts to join BRICS Plus, it's also a traditional, historical American ally. So, should we expect President Erdogan and President Trump to, in the coming months after Trump takes over, Professor, an official visit or maybe, I mean, telephone conversations? Probably that might happen because during, unfortunately, President Biden's term, no official visits took place. So, should we expect a closer diplomacy between two countries?
We have a very clever uh, Turkish ambassador to the United States, who was
Mr. Senator,
also,
His
that's right,
Excellency, yes.
and he was the Turkish ambassador to the United Nations. And if anybody knows, as a career diplomat, what diplomacy is about, he's the man. And I can only say he has been very low key since he took the post some months ago. And he works very carefully in trying to restore the image, the trust, etc., which has become very, very opposite since October 7th of 2023. And he knows it. He knows how vital the Jewish community in the United States plays a role politically. And he knows that until then, uh, Turkey was having a very good relationship with Israel and with the Jewish communities across the world, for the most part. So now that watershed, October 7th, is really something to rebuild. The question is, how do you rebuild it now with Donald Trump coming to become the president? And the way you rebuild it is you say, all right, we have our differences, just like Merkel and Obama had their differences about how to fight the Great Recession, which is the great economic crisis of 2008. Merkel says, I don't want to spend money because of hyperinflation experience in the 1930s following the Great Recession. And Obama says, let's spend, spend, spend. So there's two different approaches to a crisis. Now, that's not political in the sense of, people. Well, it is people, but in the sense of how do you really resolve the problem? Because the banks are really the problem, but yet you have to spend money to make sure the banks survive. So it's a double standard. And that's often the case when you're pragmatic. You just have to live with it. So I think President Erdogan is a very smart and very capable statesman. Yes, I say statesman. He has the ability to foresee how to keep in power. He wouldn't be 20 years president of this country. So he has all the resources at his hand. The only problem is that he may find himself in a very peculiar place if he doesn't foresee what is coming. And this is what I'm worried about. Because you can say, I am really for my people, as I'm a religious person, so I'm going to look at the victims. But then you have to ask yourself, how do these victims become victims? And that's going to be the reason that the Donald Trump, with his perception, says, well, they're all more or less terrorists because of what happened in 9/11, et cetera, et cetera. It's about extremists. And you're not going to go back and forth with a lot of discussions because you have the Israeli envoy, Huckabee, to say, I don't even believe there is Palestinians. Hope we don't even get into that kind of discussion. So if you want these two men to be pragmatic, make sure you have clear objectives. And what are they? I want peace and stability in my neighborhood. I don't want the Americans to be around. Take care of yourself. You're all grown up. You have money, resources, trade, and figure it out and get rid of all those proxies. I think that's the kind of conversation I would suggest those two gentlemen should try to organize.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but hopefully we'll have new interviews and podcasts in the coming days. Maybe you can also visit Turkey once again to teach some conferences and courses here at Istanbul Kent University. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for your time. Have a nice day.
Bye.